and you were not able to address other cases, I wanted to ask you whether or not you were familiar with a few other cases. Sandy Rogers and Scotty Richardson from Aiken, South Carolina. You familiar with that case?
No, sir.
How about Roger Dale Rice from Lauren, South Carolina? You familiar with that case?
No, sir.
Eric Nicholson or Marcus Whitfield from Greenville, South Carolina. You familiar with that case?
No, sir.
Russ Sorrow from Greenville, South Carolina.
No, sir.
Or Kevin Carper from Spartanburg, South Carolina.
No, sir.
Professor, those are just a handful of the more than 340 police officers who were killed in the line of duty in South Carolina. And Kevin Carper's case is most instructive because his partner did CPR on the suspect that killed Kevin, trying to save his life. Let me ask it another way. Are you familiar with the case of Ricky Samuel?
No, sir.
How about Tamika Houston?
No, sir.
How about Nell Lindsay?
No, sir.
Miranda All?
No, sir.
Santiago Rios?
No, sir.
Those are all folks that were the victim of intra-racial homicides in South Carolina. And I hasten to add there were not protests either with any of those police officer killings or any of the intra-racial killings. And I suspect you agree with me, Professor, that all lives matter, whether you're killed by a police officer or your next-door neighbor. You're every bit as dead, aren't you?
Yes, sir. I actually, as a former prosecutor and someone who's worked with police officers, have the deepest respect for them.
So do I. And despite that deep respect, Professor, I still maintain the objectivity of prosecuting police officers who engaged in misconduct. We have a process in place if you don't think you can be fair. It's called recusal, which is what some of us did in every single one of our officer-involved shootings. We recused it to another prosecutor so he or she could make that decision. So there is a process in place. You called for a process. There is one. It's called recusal. Do you know, as a former prosecutor, or can you deign what may have been the biggest impediment to our being able to successfully prosecute homicide cases, particularly homicide cases involving victims of color, in my criminal justice jurisdiction? Do you know what the biggest impediment was?
In Massachusetts, one of the biggest impediments is trying to get witnesses to come forward.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. You have a victim of color, and we had trouble getting witnesses to cooperate with law enforcement and prosecutors, which then, as you know, diminishes the quality of that case and your ability to prosecute it, which may result in a lesser plea bargain because you don't have the facts, which may then result in what you said in your opening statement, which is people have a tendency to treat black lives differently than white, when the reality is the case wasn't quite as good. Isn't that a possibility too?
For every prosecutor who's out there, this is a serious problem, and you are correct in pointing that out, sir.
Right, and it wasn't just me pointing it out, Professor. I happen to have a fantastic chief of police when I was the DA. Fantastic man by the name of Tony Fisher, who happened to be an African-American chief of police. And he lamented the exact same thing you and I are talking about, is the loss of life in his community and the refusal of people to cooperate, even in a drive-by shooting of an 8-year-old at a birthday party. A drive-by shooting outdoors where the whole world saw the car drive by, and nobody would cooperate with the prosecution in the murder of an 8-year-old. So I hope that part of this 21st century police strategies conversation that we're having includes getting people to cooperate with law enforcement so you can hold people to the exact same standard regardless of the race of the victim. Because let me tell you what my goal is. My goal is for witnesses to feel comfortable cooperating. But here's my other goal, and I'm out of time, but I'm going to share it with you. I want us to get to the point where we lament the death, the murder of a black female like Nell Lindsay, just as much if it's at the hands of an abusive husband, which it was, as we would if it had been at the hand of a white cop. I'd like to get to the point where we're equally outraged at the loss of life, and I hope we can get there.
Is Congressman Gowdy.
I thank the gentleman. I thank Mr. Chairman. Ms. Nkapi, among many limitations in life is my inability to glean other people's motives or be able to read their minds. I could have sworn in response to a question you received from Mr. Cohen, you suggested race was the basis for why we may have this constitutional perspective. Did I understand you correctly?
I believe I was responding to the question about is there an explanation about why?
Well, let me offer another explanation to you, okay? Not a single Republican who is here right now ever served under a Republican president. Not one. So I hope I do live long enough to hold a Republican president to the exact same standard that I'm holding this one. But for you to run to race as the explanation for why we hold the position that we do, Harry Reid had a very different perspective on recess appointments when there was a Texan in the White House, and none of us accused him of geographic discrimination. In fact, hell, for that matter, Senator Obama had a different perspective on executive overreach than President Obama, and nobody runs to race as an explanation for that. So I would just caution you to be careful when you try to import motives to people. With that, what are the limits of prosecutorial discretion?
So among the limits of prosecutorial discretion is that the president must comply with existing statutes such as the appropriation. So the president can't simply stop deporting everybody. And in fact, what they've done here is they've listed new priorities.
So he can't stop deporting everybody. Well, I mean, what are the limits? So as long as he deports one person, then that's a proper exercise of prosecutorial discretion?
No, under the current appropriations,
I'm not talking about appropriations. I'm talking about the constitutional doctrine of prosecutorial discretion, which if you marry up with the pardon clause, means you don't have to enforce it, and if they do break it, you can pardon them for it.
Right, so under the constitutional doctrine, we should take two pieces. One is you've got the take care clause, which says that the president must take care to enforce the laws.
Mr. Nkapi, your answer is much more complex than my question. What are the limits of the doctrine of prosecutorial discretion?
The limits are that the president must enforce the laws based on statute. So one is...
I thought he just announced he wasn't going to do that he was carving out categories and exceptions.
In addition...
And not on a case-by-case basis, too, for entire categories.
No, he is not stopping. He's not saying that he is not going to enforce the law whatsoever vis-a-vis those individuals. He is saying he is creating a program by which individuals can come forward if they meet certain criteria, and they will be held accountable to apply, pay a fee, pass a criminal background check.
But that's not the current law, right?
That is what is possible under deferred action, and that is what he has developed. Correct.
Well, I want to talk to you for a second about that background check, and I want to get into the policy a little bit. Can you tell me what a non-serious criminal is? Because when I look at the White House talking points, they're interested in serious criminals. So tell me what a non-serious criminal is.
It could include somebody, for example, who has been detained for shoplifting. Let's say a 22-year-old who takes lipstick, and that's a misdemeanor, and she.
So just misdemeanors. A non-serious criminal refers to misdemeanor convictions.
Right, and in fact, there are certain misdemeanors that are considered serious criminals under the recent memos from the Department of Homeland Security as well.
How about domestic violence? How many domestic violence convictions can you have and still remain?
I believe domestic violence is considered a serious crime under the new...
It wasn't under the comprehensive Senate immigration bill, which I have heard lots and lots of my colleagues embrace. I think you could have up to 3 domestic violence convictions and still remain on a path to something under the Senate version. How about recidivist DUI?
I believe DUI completely disqualifies you as well.
A single DUI conviction
correct,
is considered a serious criminal, even though it's a misdemeanor.
That is my understanding, yes.
Well, where could I go to find out whether or not that understanding is correct or not? It wasn't on the White House talking points. They talked about gang members, but I'm not aware of a federal crime for being a member of a gang. Is there one? I know it's a sentencing enhancement. Is there a crime for being a member of a gang?
Well, in fact, that is some of the concerns that some advocates have, that if you are being considered a gang member because you live in a certain zip code and you're being associated, or is it really based on
Well, I understand that
being
your concern is that it might catch too many people. My concern is the opposite, that it won't catch the right people. So it's not a crime to be a member of a gang. You have to commit another underlying offense, and then it's a sentence enhancement. So how are you going to determine who the gang members are?
Well, there are gang databases that exist. We assume, again...
So if you're in a gang database, will you be deported?
We don't have enough information from the administration yet, right? Remember, this was just announced.
Well, I've got the talking points that gang members are going to be deported.
But the talking points are not sufficient. They will be issuing guidelines with respect to how they will...
Who is they?
...program. The administration, the White House, and the Department of Homeland Security.